Hey there, Simon here from AQ Outdoors, just checking in with a quick educational video on some of the safety items you might want to consider if you're getting into or are already river surfing. River surfing's been taking off in the Rockies over the last 10 or 15 years. And with that has come a lot of people from an ocean surfing background like myself and newer surfers who are just not familiar with the river environment. The river environment obviously has some unique hazards that don't exist in the ocean. And so people coming from an ocean surfing background or new surfers may not have the lens to look for those particular hazards. So this video is kind of centered around that. I think just to preface it, there's lots of different river surfing environments. This video is definitely centered around cold, fast-flowing, shallow Rockies rivers in the spring, the summer, and the winter even. That's going to present much different hazards than, say, a man-made surfing feature in a canal somewhere in Europe or in the US or something like that. So take all this with a grain of salt. There's nothing that forces you to use any of this gear. This is kind of just a big picture view of what you might want to consider if you're getting out river surfing. So in no particular order, we'll start with thermal protection. So wetsuits, booties, gloves or mitts, and hoods. So why are wetsuits and such a safety item? Because the water is often very, very cold. If the water's very cold, you lose body heat very quickly, you can get hypothermic. Hypothermia is obviously a really bad state to be in. It affects decision making, dexterity, and all that kind of thing. So it can get you into a dicey situation pretty quickly. I wear a 3.2 mil wetty in the summertime here in Alberta, and I wear a 4.3 wetty in the winter with a few insulative layers underneath. A lot of people are sort of wearing 5.4s in the winter time. Booties are good for keeping your feet warm. It's really hard to surf with blocks of ice for feet, but also they provide really important protection for your feet. There's sharp rocks, the water's moving very, very quickly. I've seen broken toes, I've seen toenails ripped off. So even light booties in the summer are really nice just to protect your feet. Gloves, mitts, you lose some dexterity, but you also lose dexterity if your hands are frozen. So it's much more comfortable wearing gloves. And again, they do provide some impact and abrasion resistance if you do smash into rocks and such. And then hoods. A hood I really only wear in the winter time, like when it's really, really cold. You lose a lot of body heat out of your head. So if you can keep that body heat in, you're gonna have a much more comfortable time while you're river surfing. So moving on to the next piece is flotation. And so I come from an ocean surfing background. I grew up surfing as a kid. And in ocean surfing, flotation is often only related to big wave surfing, justifiably so. Whereas in a river surfing environment, the river's constantly moving, the currents, the eddies, the boils, and all that kind of thing. And even the fact that the rocks are often pretty shallow, we try and want to stay on the surface as much as we can and give ourselves as good a fighting chance as possible to get back into the eddy. So that could be a traditional kind of PFD or life jacket that a kayaker might wear, or it could be something like an impact vest, which is a little bit more like, say, what wakeboarders wear. And that combined with all the flotation in the neoprene that I'm wearing, I find that I'm ultra buoyant, and that's more than enough to keep me afloat. River surfing swims can be super bony, super bouncy, and super long sometimes. And so having that flotation working for you is definitely going to help you have longer sessions, more comfortable sessions, and safer sessions for sure. The next one, which is another one that is a bit of a mindset change for ocean surfers, is having a releasable leash or a releasable system to be attached to your board. Now, in saying that, in our local zone, the Mountain Wave or the Kananaskis, a lot of the crew surfing out there are not wearing leashes at all. They're just doing the fall off, swim to your board, push it into shore or paddle it into shore. Obviously that comes with pros and cons. There's no leash to get hung up in, but you can end up chasing your board a lot and ending up a long way downstream. And the longer you're in the current, the more likely you are to bounce off stuff. Okay, so I use the leash lock, which is a waist mounted releasable leash. There's also a bunch of different options. If you don't like that style, you can get ones that click to a flotation device. It is very, very important though, not to use just a regular ankle leash. The reason being is if you go one side of a rock or a feature in the river, your board goes the other side, tension comes on very quickly. Velcro in a traditional leash actually grabs much more aggressively the more pressure you put on it, and you may not even be able to get to it to release it because of the water pressure, but even if you get to it, you may not be able to release that Velcro. So you're better off not having a leash at all than having a non-releasable leash. So that's something really to consider, you know, especially if you're coming from an ocean surfing background, because that's something we never think about. Many of these things are these long held tight things that come from the culture of ocean surfing, which I'm really familiar with from my life growing up on the coast. And so helmets, you know, when I was growing up, Tom Carroll wore a helmet and he was cool enough to pull it off, but no one else really was, right? The river, again, very different environment, moves very, very quickly. Things can go down very, very quickly. And so I wear a helmet all the time. It does provide insulation as well, which is pretty rad, but it also provides impact protection from rocks, impact protection from boards. If you knock yourself out, it's hard for people to rescue you, especially if the crew around you are all just on surfboards. If there's whitewater kayakers around, they're much more mobile in the river, so it makes a rescue much easier. But if you're unconscious, face down in the river, and your buddies are on surfboards, then that's something to consider as far as, you know, if you're wearing a helmet, the likelihood of knocking yourself out or ringing your bell really hard are much lower. On that note, another thing that is worthwhile having, and it comes from my whitewater kayaking background, is some kind of signaling device. As a whitewater kayaker, something that I really lean on is a whistle. So it's just a way to get people's attention. So if someone has rung their bell and they're floating off downstream and you see it and others don't, you may not be able to yell loud enough that people can hear you. So having a whistle handy or something like that is a really good idea. Now, in kayaking, we attach it to our PFDs and it's right here. If that's a bit dorky for surfing, that's fine. Like the leash lock has a little pocket in it and such. Like just having one handy that you can get to and use is not a bad idea, I wouldn't say. I guess this is all centered a bit around my river background rather than my surfing background, and where the two have melded. Like I grew up surfing, I've been teaching kayaking, whitewater kayaking for 20 odd years. And so I have quite a unique view on all of this, I think. So the next part is, we use these a lot in kayaking for safety as throw bags. So this is not something you're probably going to carry on you while you're surfing, but a throw bag is a way that you can get someone out of the water if they're having a hard time swimming or something. So having one of them positioned downstream on a riverbank or something like that, or if you have people taking video footage or photos on the shore, someone having a throw bag and knowing how to use it could be a valuable rescue tool. The knowing how to use it part is super important. We're not going to go into that now. We have actually a video on how to use a throw bag. You can click the link above to check that out if you're interested. We're kind of going down the rabbit hole here a little bit, but this is kind of a full picture of the things you may want to consider. If you're using ropes in and around the river, you do need to have a knife accessible, because if you get a rope wrapped around your wrist and it then gets hung up between a rock and then you're jammed under the water, you're likely not going to be able to release that. So then you need to have a knife accessible somewhere that you can cut it off. As kayakers, we have those attached to our PFDs and we're able to access it with one hand. Obviously for surfing, that's a little bit more challenging, but it is something to consider if you do have people that are going to be on the shore using throw bags to run safety. And then the last thing is a first aid kit. Super simple to carry in your gear bag when you head down to the wave. Just have it there. CPR mask, stuff to stop a bleed, stuff to splint stuff if it gets busted. That's really all you need. A communication device that's suitable for where you are as well. If you have someone who has had a near drowning incident or someone who's not breathing and you're out of cell reception and the only communication device you have is a phone, it's not going to do you a lot of good, and the response time for the emergency responders is going to be much longer than if you have, say, a satellite-based communication device like an inReach or a Spot. So just knowing where you are, knowing what the cell coverage is like, and just having a really good, quick way of communicating to the outside world, I think is an ultra valuable tool for river surfers to consider. So that's a bunch of the gear that I would talk about as far as safety on the river in general goes, and sort of how it applies to river surfing. Some situational things to be aware of as a river surfer, if you've come from an ocean surfing background or if you're new to it, is foot entrapments. So when you're in the river and you do wind up swimming, which you're going to do a lot of, whether you're good, bad, or indifferent, it's very, very crucial that in fast moving water, you don't put your feet down. You're either on your stomach swimming aggressively to the eddy, or you're floating with your feet up and your bum up and looking downstream at what's coming at you. If you put your feet down, it gets hooked under a rock, hooked under a log, that water pressure can very quickly push you face down, and it very quickly can turn into a drowning situation. So keep your feet up at all costs until you're in that still, calm water in an eddy. Body and board entrapments are another one. So that was, I mentioned that earlier in the leash talk. If you go one side of a feature, board goes the other side, that water pressure builds up much more quickly than you would ever think. And that's been the cause of many drownings for stand-up paddleboarders and river surfers over the years. So having a releasable leash is basically the way to mitigate that and know what's downstream of you at all times. And the last couple, strainers, so trees in the river, they're not your friend. So if you come off the wave and you're struggling to get to shore and you see a tree, do not swim towards it and grab onto it. Works like a spaghetti strainer. Water goes through it, bodies don't so much. And that water pressure can build up, hooks on things, can pin you underwater, and they're ultra dangerous. And then the other one's undercuts. So undercut cliffs where water kind of flows into an undercut, into a cave. They often don't let people out. So, you know, they're hard to identify, but that's something that I just thought I would mention to cap things off. So that's it. That's a quick rundown on some of the river safety considerations and the river safety gear that you might want to consider for your river surfing adventures. Thanks so much for checking out the video. We hope you found it useful. If you've got any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, hit like, and for more information and product and such, head to aqoutdoors.com.